across over the years who came from that area.
And it just so happens that Detective Horgus started to focus on this one juvenile he had dealt with or remembered him. He just couldn't place the name.
And all I could remember was Timmy. I could see his face, but I couldn't remember his last name.
So we were running all these names through the computer, seeing when they'd been locked up and released. And they said, Spencer, Timothy Spencer, that's the name.
And I saw where he was arrested on January the 29th, 1984, which was 4 days after Carolyn Hamm, her body was found.
Spencer's history unfolded. In trouble as a teenager, he had a string of burglary convictions, and even more surprising, just as the FBI predicted, Spencer had first drawn police attention for arson, for setting fire to his mother's car. Spencer was on probation, living in this halfway house just a short distance from where the Richmond murders took place. And according to house records, Spencer had been signed out during the Thanksgiving holiday, visiting his mother in Arlington, the week Susan Tucker was murdered.
The fact that he got out of prison 2 weeks before the first murders down in Richmond, the fact that he was available for every murder, the fact that he came to Arlington when he did for our murder.
And the FBI was correct about another important detail. Spencer lived in the area where the first rape was committed.
And that happened over there. And at the time, Timothy Spencer was living down here over this hill.
In his mother's house, barely a mile from the homes of Carolyn Hamm and Susan Tucker. On January 20th, 1988, police arrested Timothy Spencer. Within hours, they had collected a blood sample, some of his hair, and confiscated his clothing for forensic analysis.
The clothing was scraped down for removing any debris, and once that debris was collected, it was taken to a microscope. Several dozen particles of glass were removed from the debris that was removed from his clothing.
The glass fragments were of particular interest to the police.
The universe has a sense of humor, especially when it comes to cars. As soon as a warranty expires, things start to break and those repairs are no longer covered. CarShield picks up where your warranty leaves off, with service plans that cover expensive repairs, coverage that could save you thousands of dollars. They pay your favorite mechanic or dealership directly, making the entire process fast and easy. Get a free quote by calling 800-416-6522 or visit carshield.com.
After police recovered glass particles from Spencer's clothing, they were examined forensically to see if they matched glass from any of the victims' homes. One technique is called glass refraction analysis. By shining light from different points on the spectrum through the particles, the characteristics of the glass can be plotted on a graph, in effect measuring how the particles bend light.
If you stick the pen into the water, which is more dense than the air, it bends the light. What we're doing with the glass particle basically is measuring how much the light is bent in and we call it refractive index.
They compared the glass fragments found on Spencer's clothing to the glass particles taken from the broken window at Susan Tucker's home.
We were able to say that that glass that was removed from Spencer's clothing either came from that particular pane or that particular source of glass, or another source of glass that had the same optical characteristics.
When scientists completed the DNA analysis of the semen stain found at the Susan Tucker crime scene, they made a chilling discovery.
And I remember pulling out an X-ray film from the developer and holding it up from these two separate cases and being bombarded immediately that the patterns I'm seeing are the same. I'm seeing the same profile on this case from one county versus this case from a second county, which says to me that the same person's involved in both of those incidents. It really gave you chills up and down your spine to see something like that.
Horgus was right all along. The semen sample from the individual who raped and presumably murdered Susan Tucker matched the semen stains from the murders in Richmond.
There were 7 hairs that were consistent with his. There was a glass fragment that was consistent with his. His family couldn't provide him with a complete alibi for the entire weekend.
And finally, Timothy Spencer's blood DNA was compared to the semen samples from the crime victims.
Once we got a sample from Mr. Spencer to test, we generated a profile that was the same as the profile we got from the evidentiary samples. We had a frequency of occurrence of greater than 1 in a million. So that means that only one person in a million in the population would have that particular genetic profile.
And starting with the first result, the blood type, it was a match, it was a match, it was a match, it was a match.
On July 11th, 1988, Timothy Spencer went on trial for his life. It was the first time in the United States where DNA evidence would be used in a serial murder case. It took the jury less than 7 hours to find Timothy Spencer guilty of rape and capital murder. He was sentenced to death.
I feel some kind of relief, but I'll never have my wife back.
Death was pronounced by the attending physician at 11:13 p.m. There were no complications. Mr. Spencer did not make a last statement. Thank you.
Without DNA, it would have been impossible to convict Timothy Spencer. If he had committed those murders a year or 2 years earlier, he could not have been convicted. In fact, if this had been 1984 or 1985, we probably would not even have arrested him.
Some people ask the question, will DNA fingerprinting replace detective work? I don't think so. Susan Tucker left Detective Horgus, the crime scene, and Timothy Spencer left part of himself at the crime scene. But his name would never have come up if it wasn't for Detective Horgus.
The new CNN original series Diana introduces viewers to the person behind the princess and reveals a life more complicated and fascinating than the world knew. Diana, Sundays at 9 on CNN.